a critique of certain understandings of the role of evidence. Disclaimer. I am just starting to engage with the advances of natural science and the philosophy of science in a serious way. I fully expect my views on this and other issues to nuance and develop. However, in order to get my head wrapped around them and force myself to think things through in a somewhat more complete manner, I've decided to write this, knowing that it will be critiqued in its turn. This is mostly to help my own understanding and stimulate discussion. First, before anything else is said, it must be affirmed with great intensity that the view of science to which I am putting something of a critique has made astonishing advances in our understanding of the universe and has empowered us to make technological advances that are far beyond whatever we might have imagined in the past. My critique is in no way intended to encourage people to discredit science, nor to slacken the zeal by which we make scientific advance. I would only like to critique one small aspect of the philosophy of science as held, perhaps not even by many scientists, but many people I have met throughout the years and is popularly portrayed as the mainstream. The opinion that I'm critical of has often, in my experience, taken the form, we must not, or at least ought not, hold opinions that are either unsubstantiated or undersubstantiated by evidence. To do this is seen as being unscientific best or deliberately misleading at worst. This, of course, springs from a sensitivity to the fact that an appeal to non-evidence or insufficient evidence is a widespread problem in our society today. We often hear about or meet people who are very committed and excited about a position that is not only unsubstantiated, but contraindicated by evidence. However, it is my opinion that if we were really to follow the injunctive, don't believe anything unless it is supported by evidence, with all seriousness, we would completely destroy science and impede it to an even greater extent. I have two reasons why I believe this. The first reason why I think that such a view is unhelpful and even harmful to the scientific endeavor is that it seems to presuppose a logical bridge from our data to our conclusions. This was, of course, claimed by Newton, who said that he framed no hypotheses, but only presented what he observed with his senses or deduced from them. The problem is that this wasn't actually how he did his science, though he doubtlessly thought that it was. The notion of cause and effect, which was so prominent in Newton's system, was radically called into question by David Hume, who rightly pointed out that, strictly speaking, we do not observe a cause, as we only see phenomena, and we never see a phenomenon called a cause. Additionally, Hume pointed out that to say we make deductions from sense experiences is inappropriate, because formal logic and experience are not dealing with the same things. The former dealing with the relation of ideas to each other, and the latter dealing with encountering reality beyond the realm of ideas. Kant took this point extremely seriously and opened up the door to radical skepticism down the line. It was not only Hume and other skeptics who challenged Newton. Ernst Mach, the famous logical positivist of the 19th century, attacked Newton's concept of absolute mathematical space and time as distinct from relative apparent space and time. Mach, who did not want to affirm any metaphysical claims, held that the goal of science is to account for the observable facts in as an economical a way as possible, without claiming that such formulations have any necessary bearing on reality. Mach pointed out that since we are never actually observe absolute space and time, it is indeed a metaphysical invention by Newton in order to get his calculations to come out. It was so incredibly fruitful that most had not questioned it. Indeed, many people today do not question it. But relativity theory has done away with space and time as separate parameters and introduced the concept of space-time, which is much more based on ordinary experience. The point is that even if we were to take a rigid empiricist/positivist notion of science, where theories are no more than an accounting of the facts that do not necessarily tell us anything about the reality that underlies those facts, we find that we are not always consistent, in spite of the fact that this way of looking at things seems to be the only way to unequivocally place evidence at the foundations of any other thought. Such a view claims that it is dependent in every way on evidence, and so if the evidence changes or expands beyond the scope of a theory, the theory must be scrapped and a new one erected in its place. One need only point to the irregularities of Mercury's orbit, unaccountable by classical mechanics, and the somewhat embarrassing rejection of the objectivity of hypnotic phenomenon, as well, in spite of numerous painless operations for so many years, to see that even with such a view, commitment to a particular theory often blinds us to what is actually there. In point of fact, even the claim to only state the evidence does not exempt us from the problems of holding views that are contradicted by evidence. This is why Einstein argued that in order to see a particular phenomena, we must have the right theory. And Polanyi has pointed out that by choosing to understand the data in one way, we simultaneously destroy any other way of understanding it, at least at the same time. Consider the optical illusion where we either see two faces or a vase, but never both at the same time. The other main reason why I believe that a view that only allows positions that are adequately substantiated by evidence to be held destroys science is because it eliminates the ability to actually gather that evidence. The fact of the matter is that we only investigate issues in a thorough way if we believe in them or if we are seeking to disprove them. It's only by passionately believing that we will find something that has not yet been observed by anyone else, and hence there is no evidence for it yet, that we throw our time and energy into the experiments that will ultimately confirm or disprove that belief or conviction. That is why we have two lawyers at a trial. For only one who is committed to a position, whether of guilt or innocence, will be able to discover the relevant evidence. A wonderful example of this passionate commitment to something yet unproven is the Michelson-Morley Experiment, the details of which I won't go into here but can easily be found on Wikipedia. Essentially, they were trying to discern the properties of the ether, which was thought to be the medium through which light waves are propagated. That such a substance was posited should not be seen as unreasonable. After all other kinds of waves we know require a medium to pass through. Why would light be different? The two scientists went to great pains to build an apparatus that would help them to find out which way the ether wind was blowing as the Earth passed rapidly through it. Such an apparatus was incredibly expensive, requiring a large sandstone slab floating on a considerable pool of mercury. Surely such an expensive piece of equipment was not developed because there was sufficient evidence for the existence of ether. After all, it was intended to gather such evidence. As it turned out, the experiment did not confirm the existence of ether. In fact, it did precisely the opposite, and rocked the scientific community at the time, including Michelson and Morley. After all, the reason they performed this critical experiment was not to disprove the existence of ether, but to prove it. The point is that ether was held to exist for many years without evidence, but the only reason it was finally disproved was because people believed in it so strongly without evidence that they took the time, energy, and most astonishingly money to prove it right. Only a passionate commitment to the truth of an idea, a commitment that is not founded on hard evidence, for there is no such evidence, will drive a scientist to its rigorous investigation. To wait for sufficient evidence is to never begin. Galileo, for whom we are indebted for the constant of inertia, was unable to create a vacuum, and so was never able to verify his ideas empirically. It's true that later experiments confirmed Galileo's thoughts, but he formulated them long before there was sufficient evidence for them. To insist on evidence at the beginning is to destroy the scientific impulse. One might respond at this point that there is also a skeptical impulse that is also passionately committed to the acquisition and analysis of evidence. That is indeed true, as I pointed out above, where I said the fact of the matter is that we only investigate issues in a thorough way if we believe in them or if we are seeking to disprove them. If someone is convinced that there is not only insufficient evidence for a belief, but that there cannot be sufficient evidence for such a conviction, it might drive them to passionately investigate the theory in question, not to verify it, but to falsify it. This has indeed been done in the past, and we cannot ignore it, but we must beware of the danger in our methodology. It's entirely possible, whether we mean to or not, to define the playing field, that is, the terms by which we will allow reality to be spoken of, in such a way that we eliminate a priori, that is, before investigation, any possibility of verification. For example, if you are examining the cosmos with your telescope and I come up and begin to speak to you regarding atoms and quantum theory, and you say, "Can I see the atoms with my telescope?" I would have to say, "No, you cannot." You might say, if I cannot investigate them with my telescope, they must not exist. Perhaps it might take the more subtle form of, rather than explicitly claiming that the only means of gathering evidence is through one way or one particular group of ways, you only appeal to those who use the same methods as you do. In this case, the result would be to deny quantum mechanics, not by denying the means by which scientists explore quanta, but by tacitly ignoring such means. Incidentally, the appeal to a tool like a telescope would actually be inconsistent with such an attitude, for the telescope was developed under the conviction that there was something to see in the night sky that could not be observed with the naked eye, a conviction that, until the development of such a tool, could not be backed up with evidence. The problem is essentially this. Scientific discovery is about coming to know something that you did not know before, and that in point of fact that you could not have told yourself because it breaks out of your previous framework of thought. If we begin with a system and insist that anything that does not fit into the system and cannot be described in terms of the system must not exist, or at the least cannot be verified, we've closed ourselves off from any actual new discovery. The moment we say reality must conform to what I already know and have learned from other phenomena, we have left science far behind. We must examine claims on the grounds from which they arise. Science is more and more clear that we cannot describe the motion of the galaxy adequately in terms of quantum theory. If for no other reason than quantum theory is marked by the uncertainty principle, and that though the rules of quantum theory are never broken, higher levels of reality are characterized by a considerably greater degree of precision, prediction, and certainty. Nor can we discuss the movement of subatomic particles adequately in terms of the classical mechanics of Newton or Laplace. We must meet each claim on its own terms, which can be difficult. Michelson and Morley wanted to study the motion of the ether, so they had to develop an incredibly sophisticated and controlled apparatus to do so. We can theorize all we want to about the reasonableness or unreasonableness of a theory or postulated reality, but it cannot be resolved until we are willing to meet it on its own terms, just as ether could neither have been finally confirmed or denied without something like the Michelson-Morley experiment. As a Christian, and especially as a Christian theologian, I could apply this to various aspects of faith, as trying to prove or disprove the existence of God or the interaction of God with the world by purely physical observation is not meeting the claims on their own basis. However, I think that this concern can be seen regarding alternative medicine or holistic medicine, though it must be noted that I am by no means against the mainstream of medical knowledge and practice, and I'm not even particularly affirming my specific holistic practice, or any specific holistic practice. There can be no doubt that lower levels of the human system, such as cells, bacteria, and viruses, can have a profound impact on higher levels, as is seen by the fact that microscopic diseases can cause symptoms even if they are so simple as a runny nose or vomiting. However, it is equally true that higher levels can influence lower levels. Certain Buddhist monks, for example, have just demonstrated the ability to take freezing towels soaked in water and dry them by raising their temperature. Further, even something so simple as worry about an upcoming event or the experience of love will influence our lower systems by raising our heart rate, if nothing else. And yet this influence of the higher levels on the lower levels does not violate any laws by which those lower levels operate. The point of this is that medicine claiming to operate on higher levels or multiple levels must be evaluated not simply on its impact on the lower levels, but must also be evaluated on the upper levels. It might very well be the case that even on such an investigation the claims do not hold up, but unless we are willing to investigate the claims on the very grounds on which they are based, regardless of how difficult it might be, we cannot pronounce final judgment. My biggest concern is that there seems to be an attitude that science is merely a thinking and behaving in light of concrete evidence, when in reality there is much ambiguity at certain stages of investigation. Science textbooks, much like history, are written by the winners. That is, those who are successful. For every experiment that breaks new ground and is recorded as significant evidence, there is an equal number, far likely a greater number, of experiments that lead nowhere in spite of the conviction behind them. There is always, as Polanyi states, a personal element, a tacit coefficient to our knowledge that is not due to an insufficiency of our tools or data, but is inherent in all knowledge. To eliminate this entirely does not yield the objectivist ideal that has been held most famously by Laplace, but destroys science entirely.